Friday, April 25th, 1986. Deep in the forests of northern Ukraine, a dream was waking up. The city of Pripyat. This wasn't just a city. It was a promise, a showcase of the Soviet future. While people in Moscow stood in lines for bread, here in Pripyat, the shelves were full. The average age was only 26. It was a city of young lovers, brilliant scientists, and thousands of children. They called it the City of Flowers. They called it the Atom City, because these people were the guardians of humanity's greatest discovery: nuclear energy. In the town square stood a bronze statue, Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to mankind. It was a symbol of their pride. They believed they had tamed the ultimate power of the universe. But the people of Pripyat forgot how the myth of Prometheus ends. The gods do not like thieves, and the punishment for stealing fire is eternal agony. 3 kilometers away, the heart of the city was beating. The V.I. Lenin Nuclear Power Plant. 4 massive reactors, a cathedral of concrete and steel. Inside, the corridors seemed to stretch forever. They were lined with gold and aluminum panels. The workers called it the Golden Corridor. It felt sterile, safe, eternal. And at the end of that corridor lay Unit 4, the newest, most powerful reactor in the world. The engineers called it the samovar, a simple tea kettle. It just boiled water to make steam. But inside this kettle, uranium atoms were splitting trillions of times a second. It was a captive star, held in a cage of graphite and water. That evening, the sun set over the Pripyat marshes, painting the white buildings in shades of orange and red. It was a beautiful spring night. The air was warm. Families were having dinner. Children were asleep, dreaming of the amusement park that was scheduled to open the next morning. The new yellow Ferris wheel was waiting for them. Life was perfect. Nobody knew that they were watching the last sunset of their lives. But while the city slept, the night shift was just beginning at the plant. A safety test had been scheduled for Reactor 4. It was supposed to be routine, a simple check of the turbines. But in the control room, patience was running thin. The test had been delayed for 10 hours. The reactor was tired. The crew was tired. And as the clock ticked towards midnight, they prepared to do the one thing you should never do to a nuclear reactor. They prepared to play games with it. Midnight. While the city of Pripyat slept under a blanket of stars, the atmosphere inside Control Room 4 was turning toxic. The room was large, filled with walls of turquoise panels and blinking lights. It looked like the bridge of a spaceship, but the crew wasn't exploring the stars. They were digging a grave. Anatoly Dyatlov was in charge, a man known for his brilliance, but feared for his cruelty. He wanted the test finished. He wanted his promotion. The young engineers, Akimov and Toptonov, were just boys, 25 and 26 years old. They looked at the dials with growing panic. The reactor wasn't behaving. It was unstable. To understand the tragedy, you must understand the beast. Reactor 4 had fallen into a xenon pit. In simple terms, it was choking. The power had dropped too low, effectively turning the reactor off. Safety protocols were clear. Shut it down, wait 24 hours, go home. But Dyatlov refused to wait. He ordered the young men to pull the control rods out. The control rods are the brakes of the reactor. They stop the reaction. To raise the power, they pulled them out. Not just a few, but almost all of them. They stripped the reactor naked. They removed the brakes from a train moving at full speed, just to see if the engine was strong enough. 1 a.m., the central computer system, the Scala, printed out a furious warning. It recommended an immediate emergency shutdown. The reactor was now a volatile grenade with the pin pulled out. The water inside was boiling into steam, and steam does not absorb radiation like water does. It amplifies it. Akimov hesitated. He held the logbook. His hands were shaking. He looked at Dyatlov. Dyatlov looked at the clock. "Continue," he said. And with that single word, the fate of the Soviet Union was sealed. 1:23 a.m., 40 seconds. The power surged. The needles on the gauges swung violently to the right. The floor began to vibrate. Akimov screamed, "Shut it down!" He reached for the switch, the most famous switch in the history of mankind. AZ-5, the Emergency Protection System. It was designed to be the ultimate failsafe. Press the button, and all the control rods fall back into the core, killing the reaction instantly. Akimov pressed it. He thought he was saving the world. But he didn't know the secret. A secret kept by the Soviet state even from its own scientists. The tips of the control rods were made of graphite. Graphite doesn't stop the reaction, it speeds it up. When the rods entered the core, they didn't act like water on a fire. They acted like gasoline. For a split second, the power didn't stop. It jumped to 30,000 megawatts, 10 times its normal limit. The last thing the computer recorded was silence. There was no giant fireball at first, just a deep, heavy thud, like a door slamming in the depths of hell. The 1,000-ton concrete lid of the reactor was tossed into the air like a coin. And for the first time in history, the core of a nuclear reactor was open to the sky. 1:28 a.m., 5 minutes after the explosion. The alarm rang at the Pripyat fire station. Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik and his men were the first on the scene. They were told it was a simple roof fire. They had no protective suits, no dosimeters, just canvas jackets and helmets. They drove straight into the mouth of the monster. When they arrived, they saw something impossible. The core was glowing. The ground was covered in black, hot debris, graphite blocks. One firefighter kicked a piece of graphite and asked, "What is this stuff?" He didn't know he had just kicked the equivalent of 400 chest X-rays. They climbed to the roof to fight the flames. The bitumen on the roof was melting, sticking to their boots like toxic lava. But it wasn't the heat that killed them. It was the invisible light. Within minutes, the firefighters tasted something strange. Survivors described it as a metallic taste, like having lead or copper coins in your mouth. It was the taste of their own bodies ionizing. Their cells were being ripped apart from the inside. They began to vomit. They collapsed, but they kept holding the hoses. They were extinguishing a nuclear reactor with water and their own lives. While the firefighters died on the roof, the city of Pripyat woke up. The explosion had shaken the ground. People went to their balconies. They saw a beautiful beam of light shooting into the sky. It was glowing red, blue, and violet, a rainbow of death. Curious residents gathered on a railway bridge just outside the city to get a better view. It is known today as the Bridge of Death. Legend says that everyone who stood on that bridge died. They stood there, holding their children, watching the glowing fire. Ash began to fall from the sky. It looked like snow, but it was radioactive dust. They breathed it in. They laughed. They admired the colors. By morning, the sun rose over a poisoned city. And then, the crime of silence began. The officials knew the radiation levels were lethal, but their priority was not to save lives. It was to save face. They cut the phone lines of Pripyat. No one could call out. No one could tell the world. Police officers were stationed at the exits, not to keep people out, but to keep them in. The order from Moscow was simple: do not spread panic. So, on Saturday morning, life went on. 7 a.m. Children put on their uniforms and walked to school. Babies were pushed in strollers under the radioactive trees. The street cleaning trucks washed the roads with water, spreading the poison everywhere. For 36 hours, 50,000 people lived, breathed, and played inside a nuclear cloud. They were already walking ghosts. They just didn't know it yet. The city was dying, but the music on the radio kept playing. Sunday, April 27th, 2 p.m., 36 hours after the explosion. Finally, the order came: evacuate. Over 1,000 buses arrived from Kiev. The line stretched for kilometers like a yellow snake. A voice on the loudspeakers told the citizens to take only their documents and some food. "It is temporary," they said. "You will be back in 3 days." It was a lie. They left their pets, their photos, their whole lives behind. By 5 p.m., Pripyat was empty. The atom city had become a ghost city. But emptying the city wasn't enough. The reactor was still burning, and a new threat emerged. The molten core was melting through the concrete floor. If it reached the water reservoirs underneath, it would cause a second explosion. A steam explosion that would wipe out Kiev and render Europe uninhabitable for centuries. They needed to dig a tunnel under the reactor to install a cooling system. They called the Tula miners. These men dug by hand in 50-degree heat underneath a nuclear volcano. It was so hot they worked without clothes. They breathed in radioactive dust. They didn't just save Kiev, they saved Europe, and most of them died before they turned 40. Months passed. The fire was out, but the roof was still covered in lethal graphite debris. Before they could build a sarcophagus to cover the reactor, the roof had to be cleared. The Soviets tried to use machines. They sent remote-controlled robots, even a lunar rover from the space program. They even asked West Germany for their most advanced police robot, the Joker. The Joker moved for a few minutes and then died. The radiation was so high it fried the robot's electronic brain. The machines failed. So the generals made a chilling decision. If metal robots couldn't survive, they would use biorobots. Biorobots. That was the code name for men. Young soldiers, reservists. They wore handmade lead suits. They looked like medieval knights. Their orders were simple. Run to the roof, throw one shovel of graphite into the hole, run back. They had 90 seconds. Any longer and their nervous system would collapse. 3,828 men ran onto that roof. The roar of the radiation was so strong they could hear it. A static buzz in their ears. The taste of lead in their mouths. They were human sacrifices, shovel by shovel. By November, the roof was clean. 400,000 cubic meters of concrete and 7,000 tons of metal were poured over the reactor. They built a tomb, a sarcophagus. Inside, the beast was locked away. But inside that tomb, the elephant's foot, the most deadly mass on Earth, was still glowing, waiting in the dark. Deep in the basement of Unit 4, underneath tons of concrete, something was found. December 1986. Scientists discovered a massive, black, wrinkled mass. It looked like the foot of a giant elephant. It was formed when the nuclear fuel melted, mixed with sand and concrete, and flowed like lava. The elephant's foot. It is the most dangerous object on Earth. If you stood next to it for 30 seconds, you would feel dizzy. 2 minutes, your cells would begin to hemorrhage. 5 minutes, and you are a dead man walking. It was so radioactive that it broke the cameras trying to photograph it. It is a Medusa. Look at it, and you die. While the monster sleeps in the basement, outside, a different miracle happened. Humans left Pripyat. But life did not. Without us, nature took the city back. Trees grew through the concrete of the plazas, roots crushed the roads. Today, the exclusion zone is a sanctuary. Wolves, bears, and wild horses roam the streets where children once played. They are radioactive, yes, but they are alive. It turns out that for nature, a nuclear disaster is less destructive than humanity. Walk into an apartment in Pripyat today, and you will see a Soviet time capsule. A calendar on the wall, forever stuck on April 1986. A doll, waiting for a child who never returned. Gas masks on the classroom floor, staring at you with empty glass eyes. It is a museum of sorrow, a reminder of how fragile our civilization is. One mistake, one lie, one pressed button, and a city turns into a tomb. The sarcophagus we built will last for 100 years. The new safe confinement will last for another 100, but the plutonium inside, its half-life is 24,000 years. Long after the Soviet Union is forgotten, long after our names are turned to dust, the fire of Chernobyl will still be burning. Chernobyl was not just a disaster. It was a warning. The price of lies is not paid in money. It is paid in lives. And the debt is eternal.